Hello.
Hey, Lax. Thank you for joining us. Can you see us?
Yeah, I can. Can you guys
Awesome.
hear me okay?
Yes. So, Lax, you've got Horizons here. And actually, sorry for my mistake. You're not calling from San Francisco. He's calling from India right now, which explains the hour a little bit better. But thank you for joining us. So, as you know, we've got Lax here, who's the co-founder and CTO of Zenefits. And he's going to talk for a little bit about his story, and then we'll ask him some questions. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so I don't even know where to start. So let me just start with, yeah, I did my software engineering in India at a college in Coimbatore. And right after school, I went to work for DE Shaw, which is a hedge fund based out of New York, but they have an office in India, Hyderabad as well. I worked there for 7 years doing various things, but we were primarily dealing with systems that were after the trade is made systems. So these were a lot of like financial systems, like transaction heavy. And it was a lot of fun. I worked with some really cool people. There were math Olympiad gold medalists, like Russian math champs, and like it was pretty crazy, and it was a lot of fun. But by 2011, I thought making more money with money was kind of stupid, and decided to do something a little more useful with my life, which is when one of my friends who was at the show with me, he'd gone and joined a company in San Francisco called SigFig. SigFig was you can think of it as a mint for investment brokerages. So you could connect your financial investment account and it'll look over your investments and tell you if your broker is screwing you over by charging hidden fees and a whole bunch of stuff. So that seemed like, well, it's in San Francisco, it's a startup, and it does something tangentially close to finance, like which I've gathered knowledge for 7 years. And I didn't want to like lose all that stuff. So I decided to join SigFig. But because of the entire immigration scene in the US, they asked me like, hey, like we're going to apply for a H-1B for you, but you could start work only in October. Do you want to work out of Singapore? They had an office in Singapore, and I said, yes, sure, I would work out of Singapore. So I worked out of Singapore for almost a year. I think that's where I met some of the best engineers that I've ever worked with, like best people I know. They remain like really close friends to date. And then I moved to San Francisco, and it was there where I met my co-founder, Parker. Parker was a founder at SigFig, and he was in charge of product there. So, I mean, it was really great. Like he was one of the best product people that I've ever worked with, and I think even since, he's probably the best product person I've ever worked with. So that was great. And the founders had a SigFig, and Parker decided to leave SigFig, and Zenefits. And he reached out. We used to play squash every Thursday, and then we just used to like bounce ideas around and a whole bunch of stuff. But when he hit upon the idea for Zenefits, I mean, I thought it was great. Like I think the words I told him was like, hey, like you probably are never going to have any problems like trying to raise money for this idea. But yeah, like I mean, it was great. And then coincidentally, I was working out of like Singapore and India for 3 months because my friends wanted to watch the Cricket World Cup T20 in Sri Lanka and a whole bunch of stuff. When Parker called me and said like, hey, like I'm applying for Y Combinator, and I want to put you down as my co-founder. And I'm like, well, holy shit, like wait, like let me think about this a little bit. But then I mean, the idea was really good at product. He could find like simple ways of doing anything super complicated, and I had and I thought like I could execute, and so let's do this. So we started in the Y Combinator Winter 13 batch with a little more than few hundred lines of code that Parker had written trying to sync with ADP run payroll systems. And then we rapidly put a prototype together and launched in 6 weeks. Y Combinator was a lot of fun as well, but I think the craziest thing was there was one other company in our Y Combinator batch called Simply Insured that were supposed to be doing individual health insurance, but halfway into Y Combinator they pivoted into our space, and we heard that they were going to launch next week. So me and Parker essentially got together that weekend, called our YC partners, Gary and Jeff, to call a TechCrunch reporter and decided we're just going to launch what we have, which was essentially built. So if originally the very first version of Zenefits is so actually let me just back up a little bit and talk a little bit about what we think about Zenefits and kind of why it's useful and a whole bunch of stuff. That can help explain a little more context to the story. So if you think about traditional systems that any companies use, companies usually have a payroll system to pay employees, a health insurance broker, they have a vacation tracking system, a time and attendance system, an expense management system, and so on and so forth. The problem is none of these systems talk to each other. And during the life cycle of an employee, a lot of changes happen. People get married, people have kids, people move houses, and a whole bunch of stuff happen. And when each of these things happen, there's somebody's responsibility to go and update all these systems, right? And nobody in HR, I promise you, went into HR to do data entry. They care about more stuff like culture and strategy growth and learning and that kind of stuff, right? So if the world made any sense at all, you'd have a single source of truth where you enter data once and it's going to keep all your systems in sync. That's what we think about Zenefits as. Zenefits is your single source of truth, but it's also this meta connectivity layer that connects all these disparate systems together. So whenever you make a change in Zenefits, it makes a change in your payroll system, it makes a change with your insurance company, it makes a change with your care provider, your time and attendance system, and a whole lot of systems. And that's how things should be. But if you look at this, you can also think about it as a hub and a spoke. So you have the Zenefits data, which is the hub, and then you have payroll, health insurance, time and attendance, vacation tracking, expenses, so on and so forth as spokes. So there are two components to the system. There's one component that employers or the admins or HR admins use to manage all this data, and there's another component where, as an employee, you can use it to manage your own data, your addresses, your bank accounts, and a whole bunch of stuff, right? So the very first version we launched in 6 weeks was just the employer side of things. And our rationale was hey, we have some time until somebody signs up, and then we can launch the employee side of things. So we launched this, and it turned out that there were quite a few people who were interested in this, and even without any advertisement or any branding, they just went and started signing up based on one TechCrunch article. So we quickly put the rest of the stuff together in a week or so and launched that. And I think in April, we officially launched Zenefits at TechCrunch Disrupt, where we added employee onboarding and a whole bunch of experience that just makes it seamless. And also the employee experience. When a company hires somebody, it makes that entire experience paperless and seamless and completely easy. So I think mid-April 2013 was when we launched the TechCrunch Disrupt. And then at that end of that year, we finished the year with about 4 engineers, 7 product launches, $1 million in revenue run rate, and in total about 15 employees in the company. And I think that's when we raised our Series A. And since we raised our Series A, we kind of rapidly started ramping up, because one thing we realized was there was a lot of demand for what we were doing. It is not just what people want, it's what people, and And it's the way that like we think about it. Zenefits, the whole reason that Zenefits exists is to make it easier for entrepreneurs and small business owners to realize their dream. Like as an entrepreneur, like you have a dream and you want to achieve it. And anytime that dream becomes more than yourself, and like you have to now hire somebody, you'll now have to deal with a lot of bullshit. Like you need to pay them, you need to offer them health insurance, you need to file this paperwork with the government, right? Like, I mean, if a small business owner is running a flower shop, they should be worried about whether like they have daisies or orchids or sunflowers, and not if I have paid John on time or like have I failed John's paperwork with the government. And that's the kind of reasons benefits exist. And soon we realized that like we had like product market fit. So since then we started ramping up really quickly. And the second year in 2014, we ended the year with 20 million run rate. We had, I think, about 600 employees at that point, and we had about 30 engineers. And along the way, that May, we raised our Series B in 2014, and it was crazy. It felt like almost every day the company was going to die, because it felt like we were making decisions at 100 miles an hour, and we didn't even know if the decision was going to be right. And the problem with such things is like the lagging indicators of a decision, like sometimes are longer. So sometimes it's almost too late that you've not to know that you've made a mistake, especially when you're growing that fast. Yeah, but interesting. And last year was again a pretty interesting year for us. We raised our Series C, and we ended the year. We went from 35 to 200 engineers in that year, and everything that you could think about that could break conceivably like broke with our systems, tooling, processes that we had to fix. And we ended the year with about 63 million in revenue run rate. And this year was a lot more interesting year in terms of what the company had to deal with in terms of resiliency, press. We had Parker step down as the CEO, David Sachs take over. And since then, like we've been doing a lot of remediation, compliance, and a whole bunch of work. But it's definitely been interesting. And we're really looking forward to what is next. And we have a few really interesting product launches coming out. That kind of sums up what my experience has been so far.
Lax, I was wondering, can you tell us a little bit what happens when a company scales so fast? You know, you guys were one of the fastest growing SaaS companies ever, and you said that everything that could go wrong went wrong. Can you like go in some details about what type of stuff happens and like what breaks and what you do?
Well, one is like you panic a lot, and everything seems to be on fire around you, and two, like you try to not show that panic because you're supposed to be in charge and like know what the hell to do. And three, you just gotta like make the best decisions with information at hand. I think one of the things that helped us as a guiding principle from the very beginning is that like we accepted the fact that there are always gonna be unknown unknowns, things that we don't even know that we know. So everything that we did was a rapid iteration. Our company value number one at that time was ready, fire, aim, which was more meant to be a bias towards action. Because if you take an action, you've changed the state of the world. Now you know more stuff. So by taking that action, like you've discovered stuff, now you have to integrate that back into your set of original assumptions and move forward. So everything is about like rapid problem solving, rapid iteration, and you just have to like keep going, keep moving, and make decisions. And it's just like hard to do that sometimes because you don't know if you're going to be right, and you are going to be wrong a lot of times, and that's just the nature of it.
Is the hard challenge?
It is to. Yeah, I think some of the finance background help, like because if you're taking risks, like if you're failing, you want to fail small so that you can succeed big. So I think that's why like it's iterating, but sometimes you just don't. You're just going in the dark.
Was the most difficult challenge to just deal with the fact that you went from like 30 to 200 engineers in 1 year, or was it so was it sort of like a person challenge or sort of technical challenge in scaling it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there are two aspects to it. It's definitely so that particular challenge is a lot more funner challenge, I think. So in April 2015, we were about 35 engineers. By October, we were 215. So the biggest challenges there are like every system that you thought like would work and you built for 35 engineers, like would not work for 200 engineers. Our build systems broke, our tooling broke. The thing is, like, in an ideal world, you take a process that works at a small scale, because a process that works is pretty precious and you just want to replicate it, right? But the process that works for 30 is not necessarily the process that works for 200. So we had to rethink everything. We had to redo everything. We built a shit ton of tooling over the last 6 months. From institutional, so we have this internal tool called Soron that just takes over right after like you make a pull request to take code all over to production. So Soron takes care of like CCing security when you try and make authorization changes. It checks for performance. It CCs the right people to code review your stuff. Like, think about this, right? If you have 30 people and you make mistake like once a month, when you have 200 people, you're going to make a mistake like once every couple of days. If you have the same processes. So like all of that had to change.
What's the difference in what your job looked like when you first got started and built the MVP, and now?
Oh man, I was writing code 18 hours a day for the first 2 years, and I was writing code for about like 6 hours a day, like for first half of 2015. That was right when like we started scaling like crazy, and since then we done a commit like once a week tops, and sometimes like once a month. And then I think the biggest learning is about there is no such thing as over communication. So you would say things and you would expect that everybody knows, and the next month there were 20 new people. And the next month there were 20 new people, and then in 2 months like there's 40 engineers like who don't know like what you said. So you have to like repeat yourself over and over and over again until you feel like your mouth is going to drop. But that's how like you enforce like some of these processes, and more so than anything else, you want to institutionalize all this like stuff by actually automating it. And the other thing that we learned was when we first started, we were, hey, like everybody's a software engineer and like everybody reports to Lux. And I think that started breaking at 17. So like we introduced one layer of hierarchy and we said like, let's be flat. And then there were 150 engineers. And then when people came in, because like it was all flat, like nobody knew like who was doing what, like who the fuck was in charge. Like, I mean, it was just crazy because everybody was a software engineer. So like flat organizations are great until they aren't. So we had to like start introducing structures. So now like we have a lot more traditional, we have a software engineer, senior software engineer, staff engineer, director, principal. So like we bifurcate that into management and an individual contributor track. And again, like, I mean, trying to fit a 150-person organization into a title hierarchy comes with its own problems. But I mean, like we managed to do that fairly non-disruptively. But these are just a few. Like, I mean, that's like crazy lot of things that everything that you believe in, like probably change doesn't work out.
Were you also part of the planning of that new organizational structure?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one thing that's always been like part of our DNA. I think like if Zenefits engineering organization had like one motto, it would be a giant banner that says "Make new mistakes," right? Like we don't penalize people for like making mistakes. Like if you're not making any mistakes, then like we're not learning, we're not moving, like we're not discovering more about the world. At the same time, if we keep repeating the same mistakes, then we're not moving either. So it's about making new mistakes, right? Which also means like we want to learn from collectively the experience of not just us, but like we talk to a lot of other leaders and engineering organizations in and around Silicon Valley and around the world as well. And I think that's one of the best things about Silicon Valley is that how gracious people are to share their knowledge. So we spoke to Uber, LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, and all of those leaders about like, hey, like how did you do X? How did you do Y? So one thing that we adapted from Google was this concept of Google resumes. So every staff engineer and above in Google has their Google resume, which is all the work they've done at Google, on a public intranet. So anybody can go take a look at it and see like, hey, like John, like what has John done? Why is John a staff engineer at Google? And then you go see like, oh, John optimized the search algorithm and the homepage loading. Oh shit, like John's legit, right? So, but like, so we thought that was a really great idea and being transparent about like what work people have done and why they are a certain title and a level. So we took that, and but one thing that we kind of forgot about this entire thing while doing the title process was like we were like, oh, let's come up with these 4 titles and let's do this job description, and like we spent a couple of weeks there, and nobody could like we couldn't get anybody to agree on like what these 4 titles are or like what the description should be. And then like we realized like this is so stupid, like titles are a solved problem in the world. Like companies do this all the time. So we just took the IEEE title hierarchy and just like adapted it with the roles and definitions. But that was one lesson where like even though like our goal and motto was to not like we are not a unique snowflake. There are a lot of like solved problems in the world and you don't need to solve it again. So just like take what's there and like adapt it and use it. So it was a good reminder for us that like even we forget it sometimes. So one thing that we do today, whenever we have a problem, we review existing literature, how other people solve it, and that's number 1 step of our design review.
That's interesting. I don't know if many people here know exactly what Zenefits actually looks like as a product, because a lot of people here are college students and sort of have not worked at a company. So like if we were to like on the first day when you set out to build like the MVP, like what did that actually look like? Like what APIs did you have to integrate with? How difficult was it to build that MVP given the fact that you're sort of taking care of the annoying stuff for other people?
Yeah, so first thing you should understand is like we work in a legacy industry, so there are no APIs. So payroll systems don't have APIs. Like even if they do have APIs, it's not complete. And then you're working with insurance carriers whose state of the art is like mainframe systems and form fillable PDFs. So how do you work with like so essentially Zenefits is a giant distributed data system where you make change here, it needs to replicate that data everywhere. Except that like you don't own all the nodes in the distributed system, and sometimes there's no network. So how do you deal with it? How do you ensure eventual consistency? How do you ensure fault tolerance? How do you ensure that like it even works? So a lot of stuff like that we did was a classic Paul Graham, like do things that don't scale. So our very first version of automation was a person like sitting and typing out the PDF forms and emailing it to a insurance carrier. And our second version was like we would try and template that PDF, and the machine would automatically generate it and email it to the insurance carrier. Our third version was like we had a form generator. So somebody could basically use this tool to template all PDF forms so that the machine can automatically send it, right? And then we negotiated with some insurance carriers, and the best thing we have is like a CSV file that we secure SFTP over to their servers. But then there is no ACK. Like it's like you have to send data and like hope and pray it work. So like we had to develop like really clever systems in terms of like how do we acknowledge this stuff? Like so how do we log into insurance carrier websites and try and see if that person actually got enrolled? Or I mean, it's a lot of like ugly legacy systems that we deal with. So a lot of our systems are architected to have like multiple levels of failures, multiple levels of. So we use automation as a toolkit where there are a lot of different tools, and we gradually degrade to like the worst tool from the best tool. So that's kind of like sometimes how it works. But the MVP was, we are primarily written in Python, Django, and on the front end we have Ember.js. And we also have like a few other languages that does like some crazy parsing, PDF parsing and stuff like that. But the very first version of the systems were just pure Python, Django, and Ember.js. We picked Django because when Parker was like trying to do this, I asked him to learn Python. Like he actually taught himself how to code and built a very basic thing between ADP run and Zenefits. So the very first version was you could log into Zenefits, you would give it your ADP run credentials. We would go to that payroll system, pull all the data so that you have all your employee data in one place that you can then use to do health insurance coding and buy health insurance very easily. But yeah, like our systems have evolved to a great deal like since then. But it is as simple as that. The very first version was as simple as that.
Got it. And what is it that you find most like exciting about your everyday work as Zenefits?
Well, I mean, like I think the most exciting part about everyday work at Zenefits is that like you come in every day and you get to work on systems and tech and improve the systems and tech that actually makes a difference to people. Right? Zenefits makes it easier to start a business, easier to run a business, easier to hire employees, easier to offer benefits to new employees. Like that's the primary goal, which makes it exciting to come to work every day. But there are a lot of like second order things. Like when we were very early, it was just the people. You were like 6 people in a room, like trying to do something against all odds. So like there's just a bond that forms. Like, and I just wish that like we could have been 6 people in a room for a lot longer. But then like that's just bittersweet. I guess like if you're 6 people in a room for a lot longer, you want to be bigger a lot longer. So the grass is always greener on the other side. And today the second order effect is like I'm just really excited by like we have a huge like, so keep this to yourselves. Like I think we have a new version of the product launch coming up in October, and like we're doing a lot of stuff for that.
Awesome. What do you, when you interview, I mean, do you still interview prospective engineers for Zenefits?
I do some, but the first 150 engineers, like I interviewed all of them, and I still remember their like final interviews that I had.
What do you, yeah, how did you conduct those interviews, and like what did you look for?
I think the primary thing we look for is like that you're curious about the world, you're curious about the world around you, and you're naturally thirsty for like kind of like learning how things work. I think that's the biggest thing. And then the second biggest thing is that you care. You deeply care about what you do, like putting out your work. Like this is my work. Like it better be like good enough, right? I think with those two characters, like I think everything else kind of like is taken care of. But I think like part of our interview process is also like influenced by like my time at the shop where I ran the campus network stuff. Something that I think we always used to look for there is we always ask people like what their story is, and we look for interesting stories, because one thing that we believe in, like people with different backgrounds, different life experiences, like add a lot of perspective, bring a lot of perspective to the table in terms of how do you build like great products.
Got it. And as far as the technical questions did you also use like existing literature for that, and sort of like, you know, is it very similar to interviewing at Google or at Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, like, especially, like, I mean, like we were hiring crazy amounts, right? So we went very standard, like 3 rounds of algorithmic interviews, 1 design. I mean, like 2 algorithmic interviews, 1 design, and then like we finally had a hiring manager interview. But since then, like we've differentiated between, if you have less than 2 years experience, you go through algorithmic interviews and design. If you have more, then we have a slightly more nuanced design, systems architecture, build your own product kind of an interview. But yeah, I mean, like our goal was to hire like 15 to 20 engineers every month. So we couldn't really have like try it before you buy it. Like we'll work with you for a week. Although we would have liked to have done that.
Got it.
Interviews are, I mean, like interviews are like, they're not a very great signal. You can have a lot of like false positives as well as false negatives. So one thing that our rule was that like you hire fast, like, but you also fire fast. So we had a 30, 60, 90-day rule. So in 30 days, like we see if the person has done anything useful. In 60 days, like we look at like, hey, like have they done something bigger? In 90 days, we look at like whether they've started integrating with the team and are starting to contribute. We expect people to do like crazy, but like no, and it's always like easier like if you can fire faster than like if you let people integrate with the team, they have friends, and it always becomes harder there. I think that's one thing that like we didn't do very well early on, but we corrected that like fairly quickly, because especially if you're hiring 15 people a month, like I mean, you're definitely going to make mistakes in the hiring process.
Right. And so what is your advice for people who are just getting started as engineers and who want to go work for interesting companies? What's your advice to sort of learn as much as possible?
Yeah, I think like the very first thing that you should look for is how much you're going to learn, how much impact you're going to have. Because there are a lot of places where like you'd learn at some pace, but you'd probably be part of a really large team, and like the impact level wouldn't be quite as much. But if you're looking at smaller companies, like I would definitely look at like, hey, am I joining a team where I can make a huge impact? Like, is my work actually going to move the needle? Or like, who do I get to work with? Like, who's the team that I get to work with? Like, would I learn something every day? I think like that's the thing that you should look for, and everything else should be secondary, in my opinion. And like if you do that well, you're learning something every day, you're giving it your best, you're working like to the best of your abilities. My belief is that like everything else follows, like success follows, money follows, everything else follows.
Got it. That makes sense. And so you mentioned earlier that your co-founder Parker is like the best product person that you'd ever worked with. Like, what made him so good at product? And do you have some examples of that?
Yeah, examples are probably fairly complicated, but because we work with like really complicated processes, so I think like his ability to take a really complicated workflow and make it something very simple that people can understand, grok. I mean, I don't know like how many of you have dealt with insurance applications or like insurance forms, but very simple forms that's like 6 steps and you're done, was something I think like that was something that Parker did really well. Making the insurance plan decisions into something like Kayak, turning that into something like Kayak, and making it really easy for people to like pick up, was something that Parker did well. And I think the other thing is also, I think the thing that Parker does really well as well is that commonsensically, like the system and the machine can like do some things and make some default decisions, and not having to let users do as much. I think that's the thing. Like it's about like, why should a user do X or Y or Z? Like it's something to think about like very critically. I think one of the things that we do at Zenefits is that we expect every engineer to understand why they're working on something. How is it going to help people? And how do they even know it's going to succeed? Like I think success metrics are very important for us. In fact, like one thing, the thing that like we learned while scaling from 35 to 200 was I was talking to this person, Boz at Facebook, who set up the Facebook onboarding bootcamp. So one thing he said that stuck with me was like, hey, on day one, like you can be anything you want to be, because that's when somebody joins your company and they know nothing about your company. And if you're in a hyper growth phase and you say something on day one, in 6 months, like half the company is going to believe that's true, and it's going to become true. And he said the story about how they said like they do rigorous code reviews at Facebook, and it became true 6 months from then, because half the people believe they do rigorous code reviews. And for us, like we take that day one culture talk very seriously, and we talk about like, hey, like how do we think like decisions should be made in the local maxima by the engineer who's actually working on the problem, which means the engineer should understand like, hey, what is the boundaries of the system that I'm working in? Because if you don't, you wouldn't be able to make the right trade-offs as an engineer. So how do you understand the product? How do you understand how users will interact with your product? I think it's really important for people to understand that, because you may use like whatever tech you want to solve it, and that's great. Maybe it's going to involve some crazy machine learning, or it's going to involve like crazy algorithms, or it is just going to be like some systems with API integrations. But unless like you know how the end user is going to use the system, even if you're writing APIs, like unless you know how like somebody is going to use your APIs, like, you can't design good APIs. You can't design a good system. So I think that's something that for engineers to understand from day one.
Got it. And I'm curious, what do you think has made Zenefits so successful? Is it that you stumbled upon, an incredible opportunity, or do you think there was more to that?
I think it's part of both. We were at the right place at the right time, and I think it was just a brilliant business model. That the credit is for that is like completely Potter. The fact that we could give away this entire software system for free because we made money of all the spokes, right? For example, we make commissions of commuter benefits, like we make commissions of health insurance. We make a paid product for us, and we're building payroll, which will be a paid product. Right. So because like we could make money of all these different spokes that connects onto the hub, like we could give the hub away for free. And I think that's something that's kind of like made it like really scalable. And also like this is something real, right? It actually makes people's lives easier. You're a startup like who's just starting out, and you don't want to deal with like all the government stuff. You don't want to deal with all the regulatory stuff. You don't want to deal with all the compliance stuff. If somebody can take care of all that for you, it's a whole lot easier for you to focus on your business. So I think the fact that like it was a real need, it was something like so simple, and the fact that we could give it away for free, and I think a whole lot of timing, because it was just when the Affordable Care Act was coming, which made it easier for do health insurance shopping online, and a whole lot of luck, I guess. But it's definitely the people, the early people, the people who came later, and people today. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears.
So David Sachs came in, I think, what, a little bit more than a year ago, and he's known as being a really good manager. What are what makes him a really good manager? Like, what are some of the things that he came in and he had to deal with a lot? How did he sort of fundamentally reorganize things?
Yeah, I mean, I think David has this talk low charisma leadership. I think he's all about making sure the right people do the right things and delegating and giving them the freedom to make choices. Yeah, you need to have first the right people in the right place, and then giving them freedom to run with it and like make choices. And so a product CEO, if you could say that, and he has like great product sensibilities as well. Like, and he's super smart. Like working with him is a lot of fun. Yeah, and just getting a lot of like basic stuff like in place because we were growing so fast. Like we definitely did not get all our processes right. Like for example, some of the licensing regulations that is there in the press was an artifact of us like growing super fast and like not being able to like make all the right decisions when you're like running at 100 miles an hour. So a lot of stuff like that we've been doing is like remediating those things and like making sure like we're fixing all those stuff. It's a lot of fun working with David.
Got it. And last question on my end, and then maybe we can open it up to the class for a couple of questions. I'm wondering, when you seem to be really motivated by, I guess, both the technical challenge of scaling this and, the mission of what Zenefits sort of empowers people to do. What do you think keeps all the other engineers or all the other employees at Zenefits sort of motivated? Because there is, I'm sure, like a really sort of tedious part of the job of working on HR software and like insurance and billing and all that stuff, as opposed to, if you were working at a, Snapchat type of thing where it's a little bit more just inherently entertaining. So what do you think keeps everyone excited?
Yeah, I mean, although the technical challenges are very much not that different from like what you'll be doing working on really large scale systems. The nice thing is also the surface area of Zenefits is like super large. We do onboarding, offboarding, time and attendance systems, vacation tracking, commuter benefits, 401k, FSA, HSA, HRA, health insurance, life and disability, a whole bunch of stuff, right? So there's a lot of stuff like going on to like kind of keep people interested in one. And I think fundamentally working on something that actually helps people and can make a difference, I think is another huge part of like what everybody believes in and like everybody is there for. And finally, I mean, it's who you get to work around you. We have a great team, like great set of engineers, like both in terms of like senior talent as well as junior engineers, like who are just like a year or two out of college and are learning. So I think all of these things matter. And if you look at it, there's two ways to think about this. The first is the intrinsic kind of like motivation and about like how well a team is run, whether you like the product you're working on. Is it a well-run team? Do you enjoy something? Do you enjoy what you're doing? And do you learn something every day? There's this extrinsic thing about, hey, this company is growing very fast, so I want to be part of the rocket ship. Or, hey, like I want to work with like under the leadership of like David Sachs or like Parker, or like that is another set of motivation in terms of press, in terms of like how your friends talk about it in college, right? So you have to balance kind of both, and at least like things within our control which are intrinsic, we can do really well.
Awesome. Do we have any questions from you guys as far as scaling a really large company on the technical side? Or a lot of them are also interviewing with companies right now. So I don't know if you have any advice for them about that, and in general, how to best prepare, anything, resources.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, yeah, I'm just assuming like the table stakes stuff is like being able to write code and be able to think about like how you want to write code well. So one thing is like you definitely want to not make assumptions. If you have like any doubts at all, like ask questions. Nobody would no questions are stupid, one, and like nobody would, like, you'd rather ask a stupid question and like get the facts right than try and make an assumption and do something that the person at the other side of the table thought like was something completely different, and therefore like you didn't get the job. Like that would be a pretty stupid reason. So like ask a lot of questions, like make no assumptions, like that is something that's like really important. And the other thing is like be yourself and don't try and like do anything different that day than like you would otherwise do.
Parker, you had a question, right?
Yeah, I was just wondering what happened to the other company you mentioned, that Y Combinator, that kind of copied your business model.
They still exist, but they're not quite as big as we are.
Okay, I have one more question, kind of business related. So after kind of some of the turmoil you mentioned this year, or that happened earlier this year, did you find that many other companies were trying to like steal some of your customers or like move more into your space?
Yeah, I think one thing is that like we have probably 2.5 years like headway in this particular insurance space like than anybody else. So there definitely are competitors, and like some of them are definitely trying to use this to say like, hey, like Zenefits had like issues, like so you want to come and use us. But the key is like the value proposition of Zenefits like is still the same. Like nothing has changed in terms of like, hey, you plug and play, you have an all-in-one system, like you just set Zenefits up and forget about it, and everything should just work. So like that still exists, and like some of the new things that like we're launching in October like should make it even more attractive in terms of value proposition. So I mean, we don't think about it that much. Like yes, like do we worry about it? Sometimes, but then like you want to like really focus on what you're doing well. Like you want to keep your customers happy, make sure that like you deliver the best product, best customer support, best service that you can. And like I said, like everything else takes care of itself.
To add to Parker's question. That other company in YC, when they initially started, sort of when you were competing with them, you were pretty much both at the same stage, right? What do you think allowed you to grow so much faster and be more successful?
I think like definitely it was the product vision and the idea itself. They chose to remain in the benefits administration side, while our entire vision from day one was like, hey, all in one. It's like one system that to rule them all, like one system where you can just connect everything else and just take care of this stuff. So I think that's what was different, that led us to different trajectories.
Awesome, got it. Lucas.
You talked about how like you like a really extreme like minimum viable product pretty much, and you guys like are really high growing companies. So was there ever a point that like you weren't able to keep up with the demand, and like how did you deal with that?
Yes, that's probably when it felt like you go from like when you grow 20x in a year. You run into all kinds of challenges, including like product gaps and like trying to hold the systems together with like duct tape and like people holding like things together, like two things. So like we've done all of that stuff. Like I said, like I mean, the reason we were in like most of those challenges was like the amazing people we have, like who've not just like over and beyond, but like it was literally like blood, sweat, and tears that held this together. Like when you're growing that fast, so the people is definitely important, and probably the number one factor in a hyper growth environment. And two, like you just have to like learn quickly and react quickly. So like when we had product gaps, like we were like, oh, like we need to build X, and like so how do we build X like when the car is still moving? So sometimes we had to like change the entire engine while the car was moving. Sometimes we had to replace tires. But it's about like trying to plan how to do that and minimize risk. Because like my belief is that like software is inherently broken. Whenever you write new code and like the new code like actually meets the real world, it breaks. So like you have to like kind of like make sure like it runs really baked and few people have used it. So how do you keep launching new code almost every day without like breaking the entire system? That's hard. Like and we broke the system more than once. So again, like it's about making new mistakes. Like so, how do you prevent like these problems from happening? How do you prevent these errors? So it's a constant battle even today about like, hey, do we like have everything that we need for all the customers? Probably not. So we're building new products. Like we are relations and a whole bunch of stuff.
And then on the like customer side, how did you deal with that when like the product like you broke it? Did you like tell people that you broke it, or like you're just upgrading, or?
I mean, it's I think like right, the cost of a bug can be measured in as the number of people it affects, how long the bug is there in production. If you can minimize like either of these, like you've minimized the cost of this stuff. So the one thing that we today is that we have an elaborate like switches system where whenever we change code or we launch a new feature, we can turn it on for 1% of users, 2% of users, 5% of users to make sure like it works really well before turning it on for 100% of users. Okay. Using number one with impact. Like if you have like really good deployment processes where if you have a problem, you can fix it and immediately like fix it in production. So that's about like time to deploy and like time to fix. So that's the second factor, right? So we want to minimize both. So we do 2 deploys a day, and sometimes like if you have a really big problem in production, you can do a hot fix that can get code all the way to production like in under like half an hour. So we have like all of these systems to like ensure that like you reduce risk. But all of these systems have been like in place like for the last year. Before that, like we did like break the system quite a lot.
Cool, nice.
So what were your biggest like learnings or like challenges from building a system that was both like administrative facing and user facing?
I mean, you really have to think about like what are the different use cases, how are people using it, and a whole bunch of stuff. So I think like one of the things that we did like earlier this year was to launch of the product that can be used for employees, like that's the users. So we have most of our things on the website say, if you want to request vacation from your mobile product, if you want to look at your insurance cards, like you have it in your pocket. If you want to look at your commuter balance, like you can do that on your phone. So it's a constant evolution of like how you want to think about it. It's just, so for us, like anytime we do a new product, we have to think about three experiences. One is the admin, the other is the manager, and the third is like the actual user, the employee. So you have to design the product for like these three experiences, and like every single time you want to make a change, you need to think about three experiences, like which just complicates things, but it's not doable.
Got it. Oja?
So I read a couple of press about Zenefits, and I knew like I think it was like this year when like there are like lawsuits or like people got laid off and like things like that. I know like shit happens all the time. I'm wondering what are some of the ways that you guys did to like keep up with the morale, like when shit happens.
I mean, I think like the biggest thing that you do during those times is just be like completely honest and transparent and true as to the reasons why things are happening or the reasons why like you want to do it. For example, the most recent layoffs that we had to do was to terms of like not just be more efficient, but in terms of like serving our customers better. Right? Because we were growing that quickly, the operations department had become like hyper fragmented. That and like we couldn't like make sure that all the balls like were not getting dropped. So we had to reorganize the team, and when we reorganized it, like we had to eliminate certain roles. So just being really open with that and giving people like an option to like, hey, like if that role is getting eliminated, like we have this new role. Like granted, like you have to undergo trainings and a whole bunch of stuff to do it. You really need to like be like make sure like you do right by your employees and like be completely transparent.
Awesome.
How do you manage, so like there are enormous expectations on Zenefits from investors in the market, and then obviously from like upper management on like what the product is going to be. How do you manage all of those things with like personal expectations on yourself? And like you said, you were coding for like 18 hours a day. How do you manage like both your personal life and psychology with like enormous expectations? It's hard to meet.
I mean, I think the key to that is like you're never as great as they say you are. You're never as bad as they say you are. Like you just want to like put your head down and like focus on like what you're doing. Like all of this stuff is to just put my head down, focus on what's at hand, like building the best product for the customer, like making sure the customer has a great experience. And like I said, like if you do those basics right, like everything else takes care of itself, because if you have a great product, you're going to have like a lot of customers and grow really fast, right? So it's to kind of like almost like block out the noise, like what's really important. And that's the way I have dealt with it, and it's helped me. But yeah, like sometimes like month over month, like you just lift your head up, and like sometimes like it feels like, oh man, we've done a lot. Sometimes it feels scary, but you just go on with it.
What are some books that have influenced to get that worldview, and also any like lifestyle practices that helps you keep that mindset?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I think I lost a little bit of that.
He asked like, what are some books that have like positively influenced you, and I guess, and what are some practices that you've developed in order to stay focused and ignore the noise?
Yeah, I think like the books are. I think like Founders at Work was like one of the very first books like that got me excited about doing my own thing and being an entrepreneur and a whole bunch of stuff. And there's definitely The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Like that's a really good book to kind of help with like some of the stuff. And then I think the most recently, there's a book I'm reading, which I really like, which is called Scaling Excellence. It's by the Stanford professors. from that, I think the best thing is like to find people that you really like working with, to do the really hard things with, because like it's almost fun. Even if you're like together, like working your asses off, like trying to do things like at 2 a.m. in the night, like it's because like you like working with each other, like you like the group, you like the people, like it doesn't seem like a chore. And I think like that's probably the thing that has kept me going, like all like in spite of like everything that's happened.
Awesome. Any last question? All right, well, Lax, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. It was great.
No problem. It was great talking to you guys.
What time is it? What time is it right now?
It's 9:30 in the evening. I think my next meeting starts in 2 minutes.
Awesome. Thanks so much again. Really good
All right.
stuff.
See you guys.
All right,
yeah,
bye.
likewise. Bye-bye.